Howdy, folks. Before we get started with the next episode, I have a couple of things I would like to say. First and foremost, thank you for listening. This has been a big project to work on, and I have been relieved to finally get it out there. The second thing is I would love it if you could rate and review the podcast on iTunes and Google Play, or whatever app you listen to this on. This will help me spread the word about what I am doing, and hopefully we'll get some new subscribers and listeners. This is officially in the iTunes Store and Apple Podcasts, by the way, and it is also on Spotify. I would also like any feedback you may have about the show. If you have any thoughts about the content, the editing, the music, the songwriting, please send it to me at storiesToWriteSongs@gmail.com. Okay, that's it for now. Enjoy episode 5. Support for this podcast comes from the Bushwick Book Club Seattle, staging a monthly evening of original music inspired by literature since 2010. For upcoming events and more information, please visit thebushwickbookclubseattle.com. All right. Here we go. Hello, you're listening to Stories to Write Songs About, a podcast that features a story and an original song inspired by it. This episode features the experience of raising a child with a speech delay. My guest and I discuss the fear, anxiety, and guilt that accompanies parenthood, especially in light of developmental delays. I myself have a child with developmental issues. The story of his birth and all the craziness surrounding it is definitely a longer story than I have time for right now, but what you should know is that my wife and I have a son who had a traumatic birth that landed him in the NICU for 2.5 weeks and resulted in him sustaining some minor brain damage. He's now 2 years old and developing within the normal ranges for most things, with the exception of speech. My wife and I are constantly questioning what normal child behavior is and what is the result of his brain injury. But with the help of his PT, OT, and speech therapists, we have seen incredible progress. He is able to say short phrases, walk up short steps, and use both hands in various activities. But we do sit in a constant state of vigilance, of fear, and love. Parenthood in and of itself is a roller coaster of emotions. The euphoric highs and crippling lows arrive and depart with the same unrelenting intensity. In the first years, parenting is a zero-sum game. You sacrifice everything you have to keep this blob of a human alive. Time, sleep, money, and your emotional well-being are tested in ways unexpected. And when it's your first time around, it's hard not to overanalyze everything that you do. I say all this because I want to emphasize how much I resonated with the experiences of my guest. She too went through a period of fear and anxiety when her son wasn't talking. She also felt a loss seeing her son struggle with language despite it being a passion and a vocation of hers. But through these experiences, something beautiful was born. My guest today is Shin, a Seattle-based writer and artist who has been featured in City Arts, Yes Magazine, and Medium. She was also a Jack Straw Fellow in 2015. Hello, Shin.
Hello.
Tell us a little bit about who you are.
My name is Shin Pai, and I'm a writer of both poetry and personal essays, and I also do some work with making of art objects and art installations. I have a website, which is just my name, www.shinyupai.com, spelled SHINYUPAI.com. And I have a number of poetry books that are available from small presses like White Pine Press, 1913 Press, and La Alameda. You can also buy them from Amazon, but it's always better when you can buy them directly from the small independent presses.
Did you have you always been a writer in your professional career? Was that like your initial tract?
In my creative career?
In your creative career, yeah.
Yes, I would say that storytelling and writing has kind of been the thread throughout my creative experiences, although I've worked in some other forms like photography, bookmaking. But I think that the attraction to language and the written word has always been kind of central to my creative practice.
Mm-hmm. And most of your work is through poetry, but you have done a few short essays, correct?
Yes. So for the majority of my career and like the first 15 years of my writing output, heavy focus on poetic language, poetry in particular. And I guess it was a couple of years before the birth of my son in 2013 that I began to be more interested in sort of a more narrative prose form that could tell different kinds of stories that I wanted to share and be able to articulate, and began to write these personal essays, which have been a form that I'm still working in today.
Mm-hmm. So we are going to be talking a little bit about your son, so we'll get to him in a second. But before you had your son, was, because a huge part of your poetry is about family and about culture and about identity through that. And so had most of your work up until that point with your son, had you been focusing mostly on this aspect of your life through your work?
Yeah, so some of the themes that were really central to my poetry, I'd say, as a sort of ongoing trajectory and thread, have been issues around identity, cultural and family identity. And so while I also explore issues of spirituality and creative practice, social engagement in my work, I think the thread that is related to family, my parents, my ancestors, Taiwanese culture, and the place from which my family of origin comes from, that's definitely been an important theme for me to sort of explore and excavate.
When was your son born, and how old is your son?
Tomo was born in September 2013, and he is just about 4 years old now.
Tomo has a speech delay.
Yes.
So when was it that you first realized that he wasn't progressing in this?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of first-time parents, I did a lot of overreading of, just like what to expect, what are the markers, what are you watching for, particularly when your child isn't yet verbal and can't talk. And so, kind of looking for those sort of developmental milestones and paying attention to them. And I think around the 1 year mark, I began to sort of wonder or be curious about, when he might begin to develop more words or language, and knew also that it was really important to be patient. And I also know that like my mother, who is from Taiwan, had come to spend time with him on a number of occasions, and she speaks Taiwanese primarily with a little bit of English. And so early on, we had exposed him to more than one language. And so I was also open to or prepared for the possibility that this extra information and these different kinds of language and sounds to process could have somehow impacted his language development. So I was thinking about it pretty early on, and then, 2 or 3 months pass, goes on to 6 months, goes on to be a year. And around the time when he was about a year old, I actually wrote this essay for this Buddhist magazine, Tricycle, just about my longing for him to develop language and my impatience with it, or the struggle for me inside. And a year later, I remember sort of going back to that essay and feeling like, wow, I'm in the same place. He doesn't have many more words than he did back then, a year ago. And so more time progressed, and I would say that around the time that Tomo was about 2.5 years ago, we decided to engage the Boyer Clinic in coming to our home and providing him with some speech therapy. A good friend of ours here in Seattle, Amber Kai Morgan and Garrett Kelly of Hollow Earth Radio, their son is very close in age to Tomo. They were just born days apart, and they were in our childbirth education class, actually. And we're noticing sort of similar patterns of development with their son. And so she suggested the Boyer Clinic, where she was also sending her son Yuki. And so we decided to kind of just follow that path to see, where it would take us. And I would say that it was probably right around the time that Tomo turned 3 that really he began to sort of pick up language at a quicker speed. I was like writing down all the words for a long time in my journal, like the new words that would surface every couple of weeks, and the kinds of things that he was saying. And for a long time that list was like really small, like maybe 30 words. Yeah.
What were some of the words that stuck in your mind?
Well, I think some of his first words, and he didn't say them again for a long time, were butter and raisin.
Butter and raisin.
Yeah. he had this he has this stuffed lamb that he would refer to as Ba. And
were you doing any baby sign language with him before that, or
minimally? Because we would go to the baby story time at the Ballard Library with librarian Amy, teacher Amy, and she would always incorporate a couple of signs like, more, and the signs for like dad and mom and grandpa. And there would be these times where, especially around food, communicating around food, he'd want more, but he'd be like struggling with like how to say it. So I remember like a moment when the sign language somehow clicked for him, because like, he hadn't done the sign language in like 6 or 7 months. I mean, because we'd stop going to story time, and unless you do those sort of exercises regularly, they probably aren't going to stick. But something just clicked on for him where he suddenly realized that if he did this move of like pressing the fingertips together and tapping, that he would get more. And so he started like doing that.
You said that there was you had exposing him to multiple languages. Was it just 2 languages, or was it more than 2 languages?
Yeah, so there was Taiwanese, and then we would pick up, Spanish language children's books from the library. And because I had grown up learning Spanish as well, just growing up in Southern California, and then like studying the language for a long time, like I'm more comfortable in the Spanish language than in Taiwanese, actually. And so because I wanted to expose Tomo to a variety of sounds and languages, I would also talk to him in Spanish sometimes, and we'd read him certain books.
Have you at any point felt guilty about his speech development?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think all parents, first-time parents, who probably worry about the ways in which they may be doing things wrong, or confusing their child, or setting up certain patterns or dynamics. And so I did feel a lot of complex feelings. I think there was the guilt about maybe exposing him to too much so that his little brain was too confused. And then as somebody who works creatively in a form that is primarily language-based, there was for me this deep excitement and desire for him to learn language quickly so that we could share that as a point of connection. And your question was around, have I felt guilty? Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
Yes. And I can say, too, that now that he's further along in his language development, and sometimes I try to sort of gently correct a pronunciation, like he'll say "oza" there instead of "over there," and there's certain transpositions of sounds that he makes, and I need to be gentle about them while also letting him know what the sound really is if he wants to be understood. Like, my husband and I understand him perfectly, but it's whether or not he'll be understood with a peer group, with teachers, and sort of out in the world. And what I see sometimes is like if I repeat it to him and then he repeats it back and it's not quite right yet, and I repeat it again, he'll kind of get tired of it and be like, Mom, stop. And what it reminds me of then is of the times when I was a young person and my father would correct my mother's English. So, 2 adults, peers, male, patriarch, correcting the woman's imperfect language, and how that could really shut her down. And I think create an obstacle or a barrier to her wanting to learn more or try more. And so I think having that orientation or experience makes me conscious of just how I am corrective or careful in sort of helping Tomo with his language.
So going back to your creative life, especially as a poet, is that something that you want to encourage your son to do? Or even just any creative pursuit, something that you would want to encourage your son to pursue?
Yeah, I think for me with Tomo, I want to encourage his creativity and his imagination in whatever form that may express itself. Certainly, if he wants to follow in Mom's footsteps and write poetry, sure, but I'll probably give him a camera at some point, like one of the ones that I grew up with, and, put some film in it, or, encourage him with a lot of different tools.
Is there any other development issues that he's had other than language, like delays at all?
At one point, the Boyer therapist may have flagged for us whether or not there was any sort of social, emotional developmental delay. Like, I remember there was this whole period of time where when I would come home, like, Tomo wouldn't necessarily greet me with like a hug and a kiss. And there's a period when he was really young where he'd be super excited. And then there was this period of like, 6 months or something where it was like he wouldn't come out of this room to come and see me at the door. And now that's completely shifted back, probably in the last 4 or 5 months.
I'm trying to think if there's any other major questions with him.
Yeah. I think I do want to add something in there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So like in the time when he didn't have language, he had some really interesting strategies for expressing himself and communicating, which I found really beautiful and moving. For instance, when he would walk by the orchid that I'd have on the sideboard in our dining room, he'd sort of like squeeze his eyes shut. And, he had a couple of words, so he'd always say like open eyes, and that was like how he would be expressing that he wanted the flower to bloom. And in the backyard, we have some kind of fiddlehead like ferns that have kind of grown up, sprouted up, and so they have that very beautiful sort of curled shape or formed. And so he wouldn't be able to say what he was looking at, but he would then sort of curve his arm inwards or his hand to sort of emulate the gesture of the plant, which I found just so beautiful and evocative.
Yeah, that's amazing that some way it's like so creative, but it's also so practical for him. Mm-hmm. Was there any other funny phrases that he kind of said that you're like, oh, this is what he's talking about?
Yeah. So something that he has been saying for a while is catch a beat. My husband is pretty sure it's more like, let's relax, let's take a rest, or whatever the expression is, and somehow that evolved into catch a beat.
That's good.
It's quite creative.
That's very creative. Does he still say it?
He does.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And then he says like crazy stuff now, like pop an elbow.
That's delightful. Before we get to the song for this episode, I wanted to have Shin read a couple of poems for us. She has 2 pieces that she's going to read. The first is entitled More, and the second is entitled Marine Science Center, Port Townsend. Please enjoy.
It's called More. Miss Amy taught us how to say it using flattened O hands, our fingertips tapping out baby sign language. We modeled gestures we learned at the library those first 12 months, then surrendered our expectations of the brain and its development. Astonished when 1 year out you woke up, grew physical vocabulary, your hands pecking out a mantra for more soap bubbles, more blueberries, more milk, more blue ball, more nummies, more dandelion, more bath, more play, more driving, more slide, more outside, more jumping, more mommy. Wanting more of what you crave instead of less of what you don't, to reach towards something and take it in, a practice I'm learning now, the brain wiring new pathways, my own hands abuzz in newly formed neural connections, more kinship, more ways, more love, more love. And this is a piece that I think I probably wrote about a year ago, so probably when Tomo was close to 3. Marine Science Center, Port Townsend. After an hour of exploring indoor touch tanks with our son, my husband signals he's ready to move on, though our 2-year-old lingers, unready to plunge a hand into cold pools or to go home. He'd held back Court's hand from touching the spiked orange sea cucumber. buried his face in our arms when a crab sidestepped nearer, but regarded the colorful feathered duster worms with a closer curiosity that made me question the urge to survive, instincts that no longer serve a purpose, yet keep us from pushing out beyond the comfort of the cocoon. Hands clasped together, I watch my partner ease our child's palm into seawater, to come into contact with the purple tentacled tube worms, fan-shaped appendages pulled back in a flash. Fear transforms into surprise, delight repeating itself again and again as our son grows bolder with each reach.
This week's song is entitled Cloaks. It features myself on guitar and vocals, William Mapp on drums, Ben Jan on bass, Alex Huth on keys, and Steve Miller on electric guitar. Please enjoy.
I can't hold it in. Forgive my mortal sin. I feel its weight on my back. Have I done enough for you? All we've been through, I'll wrap my wounds in blame. Oh, I know you aren't broken, but I'm scared it doesn't get easy. Waiting to hear what you'll say. Try to resist the fear of unseeable futures, the consequence of mistakes I've made. Patience is a prison in my shame. Well, hold me up, I can't wait to hear your voice. One word proclaiming a newfound sense of poise. It's an oasis in the desert of the silent land. Well, have I done enough to help? Will I sabotage myself? I'm overheating in the desert, wrapped in my shame. Oh, I know you aren't broken, but I'm scared it doesn't get easy. Waiting to hear what you'll say. Try to resist the fear of unseeable futures, the consequence of mistakes I've made. Pretty sure I'm not the one to blame. stop and catch a beat and gain an understanding of the world at large. Within your grasp, absorb the sounds that wrap around yourself. I know that it is hard to form a common tongue. I know that you are not the only one who fears. I'm an endless well of words within a burning forge. I fashion verse and meter. Consider me a smith constructing cloaks threaded with metaphor, analogy, and wisdom. I may never understand the way you see the world, but I will wrap you tightly in my cloak of words. Oh, I know you aren't broken, but I'm scared it doesn't get easy. Waiting to hear what you'll say, and how I try to resist the fear of unseeable futures, the consequence of mistakes I've made. I'm pretty sure I'm not the one to blame.
Well, that's it for this episode. Special thanks to Shin for the wonderful poems and conversation. For more information about her and her writings, you can visit our website, storiestowritesongsabout.com. Theme song and music by Lowlands, and this week's song was written by myself, Tom Roram, and featured all of the members of my band. You can find more music at wearelowlands.com. Stories to Write Songs About is brought to you by Catch a Beat Productions, where language is key and writing with a broken pencil is pointless. I'll see you next time.